In the bustling city of Dallas, Texas, in the year 1920, a dark and sinister cult lurked in the shadows, worshipping the ancient and malevolent entity known as Cthulhu. The members of this cult were a secretive and twisted group, performing dark rituals and sacrifices in the dead of night. The leader of the cult was a man named Ezekiel Blackwood, a charismatic and enigmatic figure who had a hypnotic hold over his followers. He preached of the power and glory of Cthulhu, promising his followers eternal life and unimaginable power in exchange for their loyalty and devotion. One fateful night, a young woman named Sarah stumbled upon the cult's hidden lair while wandering the streets of Dallas. Intrigued by the strange and eerie chanting she heard coming from within, she cautiously approached the dilapidated building and peered through a crack in the door. What she saw inside chilled her to the bone. The cultists were gathered around a grotesque altar, their faces twisted in ecstasy as they chanted in a language that was both ancient and otherworldly. In the center of the room stood Ezekiel Blackwood, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light as he raised a sacrificial dagger above his head. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the true nature of the cult she had stumbled upon. Without hesitation, she turned and fled, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty streets as she raced to escape the clutches of the Cthulhu worshippers. But the cultists were not so easily deterred. As Sarah ran through the darkened alleyways, she could hear their footsteps behind her, their voices whispering in her ear, urging her to join them in their dark and twisted worship. Just as she thought she could run no further, Sarah stumbled upon a small church on the outskirts of the city. Desperate for sanctuary, she threw open the doors and collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping for breath. The priest of the church, a kind and gentle man named Father Thomas, rushed to her side, his eyes filled with concern. As Sarah recounted her harrowing encounter with the Cthulhu worshippers, Father Thomas's face grew pale with fear. He knew all too well the dangers of the cult that lurked in the shadows of Dallas. For years, he had heard whispers of their dark deeds and twisted rituals, but he had never imagined they would come so close to his own doorstep. Determined to protect Sarah from the clutches of the cult, Father Thomas took her under his wing, offering her shelter and protection within the walls of his church. Together, they prayed for deliverance from the evil that threatened to consume them both. But the cultists were relentless in their pursuit of Sarah. Night after night, they would gather outside the church, their voices raised in unholy chants as they sought to lure her back into their dark and twisted fold. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Father Thomas grew weary and afraid. The presence of the cultists weighed heavily on their minds, their whispers echoing through the halls of the church like a sinister and malevolent force. One fateful night, as a storm raged outside, the cultists launched a final, desperate assault on the church. Armed with torches and knives, they stormed the doors, their faces twisted in madness as they sought to claim Sarah as their own. But Father Thomas was ready for them. With a steely resolve and a heart filled with faith, he stood before the cultists, his voice raised in a prayer of protection and defiance. As the cultists closed in, their eyes filled with madness and bloodlust, a sudden and unexpected force swept through the church. The walls shook and the ground trembled as a dark and malevolent presence filled the room, its power overwhelming and all-consuming. In a blinding flash of light, the cultists were thrown back, their bodies writhing in agony as they were consumed by the very darkness they had worshipped. And in the center of it all stood Sarah, her eyes glowing with a newfound strength and power as she faced down the ancient and malevolent entity known as Cthulhu. With a final, defiant cry, Sarah banished the dark presence from the church, sending it back to the depths of the abyss from whence it came. And as the storm outside subsided and the cultists lay defeated at her feet, she knew that she had faced the ultimate evil and emerged victorious. From that day on, the city of Dallas was free from the clutches of the Cthulhu worshippers, their dark and twisted cult banished from the streets forever. And as Sarah stood before the ruins of the church, Her heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose and strength, she knew that she had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. For in the heart of Dallas, Texas, in the year 1920, a young woman had stood against the forces of evil and emerged victorious, her courage and faith shining like a beacon in the darkness. And though the memory of the Cthulhu worshippers would linger in the shadows of the city, Sarah knew that she would always be ready to face whatever darkness may come her way.